We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Tesam and Beis Mesechet Kesubos. This is Kesuvos Daf 59b. On the previous summit, the Gemara had asked a question from a Mishnah by Konamos, where a woman is able to say that her earnings are going to be sanctified or prohibited to her husband. And the Gemara over there said, the Mishnah over there said that even though it doesn't take effect right now because everything belongs to her husband, her earnings go to her husband, but after she divorces, after there's a divorce, it could take effect, and that's why there were Tanoim in that Mishnah that said that the husband should actually annul that vow in case of a divorce. And so the Gemara said that seems to indicate that a person is able to be makdish davar shelo bali olam. And the Gemara says no, it doesn't indicate that at all. It doesn't prove in Shmuel at all that a person can be makdish davar shelo bali olam, because the case is not where she's sanctifying the earnings, she's prohibiting the earnings, but it's her actual hands. She's saying my hands are holy in terms of anything that they produce, and therefore that is bali olam, and that won't take effect right now because she's married, she's in the reshus of her husband. But again, when there's a divorce, that will take effect. And so the Gemara had asked, but is that really true that if it can't take effect now, it can take effect later? And the Gemara says, yeah, it's comparable to the following case. Sadazusha mashkanti loch. Let's say I have a field, and this field I gave it to you as a mashkon, so you're holding the field as a guarantee, so I'll pay you back something that I owe you later. So let's say the person says, when I redeem it from you, when I pay it back, so then it should become holy. The kidsha, so that actually is considered sanctified because really he is the owner of that field. It's just a mashkon. He hasn't really given it over. And the same thing is true over here. By her yadayim, really she is the owner. She's in possession of her yadayim, and therefore it's the same idea at the time of the divorce. So it'll be able to become prohibited as a konim, and it would not be a proof to our case again. A situation in our case is where the husband is trying to be makdish regular normal hektish. He's trying to be makdish her earnings. That already would be considered a davar shelo bali olam and would not be hektish according to Shmuel. But the Gemara continues. Maskiv Rav Shisha Breder Avidi. Rav Shisha Breder Avidi asks, midami, but can you really compare again her case of her hands to the case of this field that is a mashkon? Because hasam biyadu lifdosa, because over there he has full control to redeem it whenever he wants. But hacha ein biyadu lagaresh atzma. Here she has no control to divorce herself. That's out of her control. So we shouldn't say that it becomes prohibited after the time of the divorce, that her earnings are prohibited to her husband. And the Gemara says, "Halo dami elo laomer lechaveiro sadazusha mashkanti loch le'aser shanim." If you want to compare it to a case of a field that's a mashkon, that would be a case. Let's say a person says to his friend, "This field will be a guarantee to you, will be a mashkon that you will hold for 10 years. Now the guy can't even touch it for 10 years. And when I redeem it from you in 10 years from now, then it'll become holy. The kidsha, then it becomes holy. And so therefore, again, that'll be our comparison over here. She will be able to say that at the time of the divorce that it's going to be prohibited. But the Gemara says, no, maskif Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi asks on that comparison. Midami, is it really comparable? Hasam le'eser shanim, miya biyadu lifdos. Over there, it's a 10-year mashkon, but after 10 years, he has full control to redeem it. Hacha ein biyadu legarish atzma liolam. But here, a woman has no ability to divorce herself forever, and so therefore you can't compare the case to this mashkon either. And so rather, finally, the Gemara answers, Alam Rav Ashi, rather Rav Ashi says, Konamos ko'amrit, are you asking a question from Konamos that it seems like Shmuel is saying by the case of Konim that a person can be makdish davar shelo bali olam? Shani Konamos are different to Kedushas Haguf Ninu. It's more similar to Kedushas Haguf. Kedushas Haguf would be, let's say somebody sanctifies an animal to become a korban on the Mizbeach, as opposed to sanctifying something, let's say you're donating money to the Beis HaMikdash. And the difference is that when you're making something to be a korban on the Mizbeach, that's not something that's really redeemable. That's the same thing as a konim. Uchid and it's like what Rava says, Diyama Rava, because Rava says, hektish, chametz v'shichr, mafkiyan midei shibud. Let's say you have a lien on property, but then you make it hektish. Or let's say we're talking about chametz, talking about a situation of chametz on Pesach. Or let's say you're talking about freeing a slave. All of those cases can undo a lien. And so therefore over here as well, just like hektish has the ability to undo a lien, so to konim, which is the same as this kind of a hektish, this kind of a kedushas haguf, it has the ability to work even on a davar shelo bali olam. And the Gemara asks, well, if it's so strong, v'nikdushu mehashta, why isn't it sanctified right now? The konim should take effect now. Why is it only taking effect after the divorce? And to that the Gemara says, Almur Rabbanon l'shidibudei the Baal, because the Rabbanon wanted to strengthen the shibud that the Baal has. The Baal does have reshus over her earnings, over what she produces, and so the Rabbanon strengthened it at this time, and it will only take effect after divorce. In that way, again, it's not going to become holy now. It's only going to become prohibited later on when there is a divorce. Rashi over here says, the Kedushas Haguf Ninu, it's Kedushas Haguf. What does that mean? Kedushas Mizbeach. Again, it's like you're making something hektish that it's going to go on the Mizbeach, like a carbon. She'ein la'n pidyon, they don't have any way of redeeming them. Kachin pidyon l'konim, so too, there's no redemption when it comes to konim. Lios nitter l'misha nesralav, there's no way for him to redeem it that it now becomes mutter to the guy. Sharei Eino Hektish Gomer. It's not like regular normal Hektish, like you donate something to the Beis HaMikdash. Litzvos Pidyona, where you can exchange it for something else. You donate money or something. El Asar Allah Demechad. It's really just Asar on this one person. V'keven the Kedushas Hagufu. Once you have something that's Kedushas Haguf, Mafkia Midei Shiba, that is able to work even when there's a lien on the property. Shimushu Bedis Labal V'choy. Let's say you have something that's a lien that's liened to the owner. It still takes effect, and that's why it also takes effect on a Dover Shalo Baliolim. The Kaman Parachim Kain Mayir Yashem Yigrashena. Mehashtachayil. The Gemara is going to ask if it's so strong, it should work now. Why do you have to say that maybe there'll be a divorce and it'll take effect then? And the Gemara continued, Hektish, when it comes to Hektish Kagon, Shashibit Shor Labalcho. For example, let's say a person said that he put a lien on his ox, that it's going to belong to somebody who he owes money to. So now that Balchov has a lien on the ox. And then he says, you know what, I'm going to make this ox like a carbon. Mafkia Shibit HaMalva. So the Shibit that the Malva has actually goes away, the lien goes away. He has to collect his debt from somewhere else. V'zeh kosher carbon. This animal would be a good carbon. Ve'eno gazel, it wouldn't be considered stolen. To lo have a kani leila guvaina bi'alma. It's not really acquired by the malva. It's just something that is collectible for the debt, and therefore it can undo the shibud. V'davka kedushas haguf. Rashi says that's only by kedushas haguf, something like a carbon. Ava kedushas domim the bedek habayis. But if I donated it in terms of the Beis HaMikdash owning it, its value, and it was used to fix up the Beis HaMikdash, which is exchangeable, lo mafkia shibud, that actually would not undo a lien. Keditanan be'erchen mosif odino repodas anachasim alalu. That's what it says in the Mishnah in Erchin. Chametz, now when it comes to chametz also, asa chemtza apotiki lo v'kol chavim v'gea. Pesach is for chametz mafkiu mishibud. Let's say a person made chametz, designated that to be collected by a debt to a non-Jew, and then Pesach came, that prohibition of chametz would undo the shibud. Hovekol chavim v'neser ba'anon. Now the chametz is also in terms of getting benefit. V'hadetanan hovekol chavim shehilva yishal chemtza achar Pesach muter ba'ana ukmina lahasam kashirin etzlo shemasro biyado mashkon. There is a Mishnah that seems to indicate otherwise, but that's talking about a different situation where he actually put the mashkon into the person's possession. The shichron also, if he frees a slave, asa avdo apotiki, let's say his servant is designated to be a payment for some kind of debt. The shichro alov, and then the borrower frees the slave. The shichro, he will be free. The creditor will have to collect from somewhere else. And so then the Gemara said, but if it's so strong, this kedushas haguf, it should work right now. Why does it say maybe there'll be a divorce? It should be kaddish right now. And to that the Gemara said, the tachtav, while they're married, the husband's shibud is strengthened. The Rabbanan said at that point in time when there's a marriage, he's not simply like a malva, like a creditor when it comes to the earnings of his wife. He's actually like a real purchaser, a real buyer, and therefore at that point in time it will not be kaddish. It will only be kaddish after the time of the divorce. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Ve'elu melachos sha'isha osa labala. The following work activities are obligated that a wife should do them for her husband. Tochenes, she has to grind the wheat, v'yofa, and bake the bread, u'mechabeses, and wash the clothing, mevasheles, and cook, u'meinika es beno, and nurse her son, matzas lo hamita, she has to spread the bed for him, make the bed for him, v'yosa bat semer, and she has to spin the wool. And the Mishnah continues, hichnisa lo shifcha achas. Let's say she brings into the marriage one shifcha, one maidservant, so then lo tochenes, v'lo ofel, v'lo mechabeses. She doesn't have to do the grinding, she doesn't have to do the baking, she doesn't have to do the laundering of the clothing. Shtayim, let's say she brings in two maidservants, ein mevashela, she doesn't have to cook, vein meinika espina, she doesn't have to nurse her son. Shalosh, if she brings in three maidservants, ein matzas lo hamita, she doesn't have to make the bed, vein osa betzemer, she doesn't have to spin the wool. Arba, if she brings in four maidservants, yosheves bekatadra, she can sit in her chair, she doesn't have to do anything. Rabbi Eliezer says, afilu echnisa lo mea shvachos, even if she brings in 100 maidservants, kofa lasos bat he can force her to work with the wool, because if she's doing nothing, that's just going to cause licentiousness, it's going to cause activity that is not permitted. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, even if a person makes a neder to prohibit his wife from doing work, that's not a good thing. He divorces her and he has to pay her the ksuba. Again, because doing nothing, that just leads to idiocy. And Rashi over here says, Ofe, she bakes pas, the bread, shtayim einam evashelas, if she brings in two, so then she doesn't have to cook. But Gemara Parach, the Gemara is going to ask, Amai lo ifter min kulu b'chodesh shivcha, if she brings in one shivcha, she should be potter from everything. Shechnis b'makom, the shivcha should simply take her place. Yosheves bekatadra, then it says she sits in her chair. What does that mean? Lo sitrach b'shvila, she doesn't have to do anything for him. Leilech b'shlichas lavi lo chayfetz min bayis lali, she doesn't even have to go, let's say, to bring something from the house to the upper floor. Shiyamam, again, like we said, she go, and that leads to idiocy. And And the Gemara says, Tochenes al kadaitach, do you really think that the wife is doing the actual grinding of the wheat? As Rashi says, Hamayim megalglin ha'ofen v'tochen, the water is what pushes the wheel, and that's what causes the grinding, or sometimes the grinding is done by animals who are pulling it, but it's not done by the people. And so the Gemara says, rather what it means to say is she prepares everything to be ground by the machine. And the Gemara continues, if you want, I could say another answer, we're talking about a situation where she's grinding by hand. There are ways to grind with a rechayim shel yad, Rashi says, and that could be what the Mishnah is referring to. And the Gemara continues, Masnisin de Lok Rabbi Chia, our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Chia, the Tanya Rabbi Chia, because Rabbi Chia taught, Einisha el liyofi, Einisha el lebanim. A wife is for beauty and a wife is for children. A wife is not for doing these kind of tasks that are listed in the Mishnah. But Tanya Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Chia taught, Einisha el letachshita isha. A wife is for the ornaments that the wife wears and for the jewelry that the wife wears. But Tanya Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Chia taught, Harotza shiyad in his ishto, if a person wants to beautify his wife, Yal bishana klei pishtan, he should have her wear linen clothing. Harotza shiyal ben espito, if a person wants his daughter to be lighter, to have a fairer complexion, Yachilena efrochim, he should feed his wife young chickens. V'yashkena cholav samach lapirka, and he should give her to drink milk near the time of her maturity. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Umeinika espena, she has to nurse her son. And the Gemara says, Leima masnisin deloka beis Shammai. Let us say that our Mishnah does not follow beis Shammai. The Tanya, as we learned in the following brayso, Nodra shelo lohanek espena. Let's say she takes a neder that she's not going to nurse her son. Beis Shammai omrim shel metes dod mipiv. Beis Shammai says she can remove her breast from his mouth, meaning she has no obligation once she took this neder. Beis Hillel omrim, Beis Hillel say, no, kofa minikto, the husband can force her, and she has to nurse her child. And so you see the idea over here is that Beis Hillel is saying, since it's an obligation, the neder does not take effect. And Beis Shammai seem to say that it's not an obligation, and therefore the neder does take effect. And the brayso continues, Niskarsha, let's say there's a divorce, Eino kofa, so even Beis Hillel say that he no longer can force her to nurse the child. Vimhaya makira, however, if the child recognizes her, if he only takes milk from the mother, so nosin laschara, he can pay her, v'chof, and force her, umeinikto, and then she will have to nurse the child, because otherwise it's dangerous for the child. In any case, it seems from this brayso that Beis Shammai say there's no obligation for the mother to nurse her child. And the Gemara says, no, afilu tema Beis Shammai. You can even say our Mishnah follows Beis Shammai. Hacha b'mayaskinim kigon shenodrahi v'kayim lahu. The case over here is very specific. It's where she made the neder and he sustained the neder. He didn't try to annul the neder, and therefore really it's as if the husband himself is saying that there's no obligation. In that case, there's no obligation, but in general, it could be there is an obligation. Because Savri Beis Shammai, who knows Seinetzba Bein Shina, Beis Shammai hold that if by maintaining the neder, what he's really doing is he's putting his finger between her teeth, meaning to say it's like his fault. It's like he's the one saying she has no obligation, and that's why she has no obligation. Beis Hillel Savri and Beis Hillel hold he nosna etzba bein shina. No, she's the one that made the neder in the first place. It's like she's putting her finger between her teeth, and therefore it's coming from her. And again, she doesn't have the power to say she's not obligated, because in fact she is obligated. But the Gemara says if that's the case, if they're arguing about a situation in terms of a neder, who's the one that's really trying to get out of it? Is it him or is it her? That should be by any ksuba obligation. Anytime she takes a neder and says that she's not going to do one of the obligations of the ksuba, and he maintains the neder, that should be a machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Why are they arguing only about nursing? It seems like there's something particular to the situation of nursing. V'yod, and further, Tanya, we learned in a brayso, Beis Shammai omrim eina meinika. Beis Shammai say in general she doesn't have to nurse her child, nothing to do with an oath. It seems to be that Beis Shammai say in this brayso there's no obligation on a woman to nurse her child. And the Gemara says you're right. You have to go back and say our Mishnah is not like Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai indeed hold that there's no obligation for the mother to nurse her child. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Let's say it's a situation of divorce. So the brayso said if the child recognizes her and he only takes the milk from her, so then the husband can hire her and force her to nurse the child. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Amud Aleph.